Why is Just Press Record collaborating with the intentional investor? Channels collide. This is a new YouTube feature. And look, I know you're watching Just Press Record because you want to see me pick two strangers that I think should meet and introduce them to each other. It's interesting because you get a lens when you introduce a stranger into the equation onto somebody else's processes, thinking, history. You just can't get it any other way. It's a really cool way to network and connect ideas and people. But the intentional investor is a one-on-one interview series that I've been doing for about the same amount of time, where I take one of these people who's really, really good at thinking strategically, usually from markets or business or sometimes politics adjacent, stuff like that, strategic thinkers, but they do it without you losing or having lost their humanity. And I pull out their backstory. So whereas Just Press Record gives you the lens of a stranger shining these lights and insights onto what makes them tick, the intentional investor is where it's just me being curious. I'll be very honest. And you got a lot of the same guests. The new YouTube collaboration feature allows us to put both shows in both places, on Cultish Creative YouTube and on Epsilon Theory YouTube. So if you've never seen The Intentional Investor before, I wanted to give you some clips. There's an art to this. There's way more where this came from. Jack Forehand, let's give the people a taste.
The way I think about it is a goal is something that I'm striving for. I hope happens. It's kind of like I want this to be the case. The vision for me is it is going to happen. And I have kind of gotten to the point where, not out of arrogance, but the things I would have in the past called a goal, I don't choose that unless it's something I know that I'm going to be going towards, and then it's going to happen. And I don't know if that really makes sense. In my mind, it makes sense. But it's just a shift in kind of perspective to me, the vision is, I know this is going to happen. Now, it might manifest in a slightly different way. We talk about, you mentioned Pursuit the Collective. Like, that started out as one thing, it's evolved. That will be a thing in the future. But in my mind, the vision today has a record label with it, a production company, think along the lines of PG Lang and what Kendrick's doing. This would be my version of that. There's no doubt that Pursuit is going to be something bigger. I have a vision for it. It's not a goal because it's not something I want to happen. It's going to, but I don't know exactly what it will be in 3 years and then beyond that.
I think about most of my life, I think entrepreneurs, right? It's the misnomer that entrepreneurs are risk takers, right? We're risk mitigators. You mitigate the risk so much then you have to take the leap, right? And that's what I think the creativity in entrepreneurship comes from risk mitigation. And I always think intuitively, I always had a good sense of arbitrages and optionality. And it was getting a better sense of that. But I also want to reiterate, though, this is me telling my own narrative. But let's be honest, like, as a commercial real estate developer, I blew up in the great financial crisis. So there's a lot of things I did wrong too, like as taking on too much leverage and not cash flow, time horizons. There's a lot of things I did wrong. But I think intuitively, entrepreneurs that mitigate risk, we're essentially always trying to find an arbitrage or some sort of call option on anything we're doing. And that's the beautiful creativity you get from entrepreneurship. Like, I even think about, like, I used to even middle soccer bets using UK bookies and everything, like, because you could guarantee an arbitrage, right? Like, if you could find those different pricings on that, or like I used to count cards in baccarat, right? That's an arbitrage. I like risk-free money. I don't really like taking risks. Like, it makes me feel bad. It hurts. I don't like being up at night. But, like, unfortunately, lack of free will. This is the unfortunate roller coaster I'm on, that I just beat myself in the head every day through entrepreneurship and trying to suck less.
I need more about Susan Hunter.
Yeah, amazing woman. I mean, I don't know what I did to get on Craigslist that one specific day and, like, my world crossed paths with hers, but it did. She is now retired. Her and I still stay in very close contact. I was actually just texting her yesterday. She just a wonderful person. She's big on what she calls have you ever heard of BHAGs?
Big, hairy, audacious goals. Yeah.
Yes.
All
So
right.
she's big into those. And
Okay.
so that's when I came to her and I was like, I'm going to tell you my BHAG. And I'm telling you this because I want accountability, and I'm going to need your support on it. And she just has that kind of, I don't even want to call it personality. It's personality, but it's also like how you run a company too. Like, she she had that, like, there's some business owners, managers, whoever out there that would have just shut me down and been like, no, if you want to do that, then, you can't do that and this. Um,
Quit, come back and apply again.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that was never even close to, I mean, she actually paid for my, law school admission test, like, study course thing. She paid for that. Kept me accountable to, getting through like the application process. She helped like edit my personal statement for my application process. Like, looking back, I don't know what I did right to have her in my life, but she is definitely one of those like pivotal people that led me to be where I am, figuratively and literally. I was like, here's the thing. I want to still work here full time and go to law school. And she was like, first of all, who the heck does that, you weirdo? Like, no one does that. I see clients today that I knew way back then that they will say, Jenny, we've watched you grow up from, going to law school, passing the bar exam, getting married, buying this law firm. And it makes my heart like just burst because it's so true. It's so, so true.
We want to invest where we think the best opportunities are. And we think the best opportunities are where people have the incentives given to them by the basic foundations of personal and economic freedom to do the best thing for their clients. In an autocracy, you don't compete by having the best product or making people's lives better somehow. You compete by having the favor of the government. And if you have the foundations of personal and economic freedoms in place, you're incentivized to compete on merits in a freer marketplace. There's no 100% free market, right? There's no 100% unfree market. There's no perfect data set, but we're going to try to be in the freest kind of country set in this space.
My mother was on welfare at the time, staying, like I said, living in the projects. My dad really couldn't read and write well. And they kind of made a pact. And my dad was like, look, you teach me to read and write, I'll get a job. And I'll take you out of your mother's house. That was one. And then he found out my mother was on welfare. And he was like, I'm going to get another job and we're going to get you off welfare. And he got a second job and he got her off welfare. Their story to me is just so special because they needed one another, right? My mother she had been left deserted with a 9-month-old. My dad had no meaningful skills except for grit and hunger and desire. And he made my mother a promise and she made him a promise and they made it work. Ruth was the lunch lady. And one day I didn't have lunch. And she came, she said, sweetheart, you don't have lunch? I said, no, I didn't have lunch money. And she went to get me McDonald's.
Oh, she didn't just hook you up with some lunch. She
went to get me McDonald's. And
Say the word.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And we hit it off and she was like a mom away from home. And again, other times I'd have money, she'd give me lunch money, she'd buy me lunch. And she lived close by. And in the summers, I would go to her house. I learned to swim in her pool. Mind you, there was no way she could have saved me if I drowned. She used to sit on the side of the pool in a chair, playing Elvis, smoking cigarettes, drinking iced tea, right? And she would make me peanut butter and jelly sandwich and this iced tea with no sugar in it and Elvis all day. I think everyone has it like this, but I think for me, and we always joke about it in my family, it's like, I think the fact that I had a praying mama, God always sent someone to fill the gaps where my parents couldn't, right? Like I couldn't buy my first pair of track spikes. Marty Holler bought them. So, it's like there was always someone to kind of fill in the gaps, no matter where I was in my life.
Well, most people who we call creative, all these artists, what they're doing isn't creative. They're not creating anything. They're crafts people. They're doing something that's been done before, maybe a little better, a little different, whatever. That's all cool. And again, all that's great. But along the way, we've thrown the inventors under the bus. If you look at the whole history of skateboarding, Rodney basically invented every trick any kid ever did on a skateboard. There are some exceptions and all that. And he wouldn't say it that way. But he was the first one to like ollie a skateboard which is the fundamental basis of everything you've ever seen a kid do on a skateboard. So, and the thing about it is, Rodney grew up kind of in isolation in rural Florida. And so there's some parallels between that experience and my growing up in rural Alaska with an Apple II. So, probably the world would be much better off if Rodney had gotten the Apple II. Skateboarding would be much worse off. But Rodney's amazing. And so he was able to imagine these things that no one's ever done before on a skateboard, and then spend months trying to dial it in and make it happen. And I think that what is lost in the world oftentimes is an appreciation for how difficult it is to do something new for the very first time. Most people will never do that in their lifetime. Most people probably won't even know anybody who's done that in their entire lifetime. And so they don't have a frame of reference or relationship to how hard that is, how much goes into doing something creative, creating something for the very first time. And that's what inventors have to do. And, if you think about how many artists you could name, think of creative people, we think of artists or painters or people making movies or actors or musicians. You can probably name hundreds of them, but try to name an inventor. It's not dead, or, it's just, most people can't do it. And I contend that the inventors are our most important creative class. Are the artists, all the pop singers, you could live without all of them. But without inventors, you wouldn't be alive at all. And so I think, Rodney is a great example of somebody who in one lifetime was able to create from nothing, really, everything that we think of as skateboarding today.
Look, if you're an Egyptian woman and you get a divorce, you're going to put your middle finger to the world, because the world is not, your support structure is not going to be that supportive for you. Okay. My mom is a rogue, and she's a hard-headed lady, and she's tough as nails. And she always told us that, she's always like, you are loved, and you really felt it, and you should not care. Don't worry about what other people think. She just constantly drove this message into my mind. Do not care what other people think. And I don't think anybody can actually perfectly do that. And there are good reasons to care about what people who you respect and love, what they think. I do think it's more nuanced than just don't care what other people think. But I would say my wife to this day thinks that would say that this is my superpower. She's like, you somehow have the whole status game stuff. She's like, I don't think I'm totally immune to it, but she's like, compared to most people, you're pretty immune to it. You're never thinking in those ways. And I think that was what I think about it is Jay was like that. He was a huge influence on my life. My mom is like that. And I don't think I consciously ever became that way. As a matter of fact, I was the opposite. I was always looking for approval. I was always how do I fit in? I was worried about these things, and I desperately wanted to fit in. But as I matured, as I got older and you got more comfortable in yourself, I think I shed a lot of that.
I think a lot of us in the industry, as I did, go through cycles of earnestness and cynicism. We are earnest. We open ourselves up. We realize that the world is a rough place for people who are too earnest. And then we fall into cynicism. We crash, we burn, we hopefully figure out a way to return to earnestness. And I think that all of those things you mentioned, what they boil down to, and this is something that took me forever to learn, is humility, right? When you approach a situation with earnestness, I think humility means something a little bit different, right? It's the same as when we think about the sort of wisdom of the old, what is it, Scythian king or whatever, who's got the ring that says this too shall pass on it. I think we often forget that it was a two-sided ring, and the whole story was when everything seems too good to be true,
It's the turnover.
it's this too shall pass. And when everything seems too bad to be, true, this too shall pass. And I think that's the humility that we have to adhere to in both those, when we're feeling earnest and when we're feeling cynical about something. And the usual way to show humility is to wait. I think it's to not make decisions too quickly, or when we're, about what's going to work and what's not going to work. But I think that by and large, as we think about agency and some of those other lessons that I got from my parents, they boil down to that kind of humility that says, I don't know what I don't know. And I'm not going to give in completely to this, whether it is the earnest feeling or the excessively cynical feeling that I'm feeling right now. And learning not to be an arrogant ass has been a life's work for me. And I'm getting really good at it. I'm trying at it. And I really am. And no investment I've ever made other than the investment in my family has paid off anywhere as close to managing that and figuring out, how do you keep your humility and hold your passionate views in check and sometimes wait a little bit. And that's been one of the most powerful lessons. And I think it applies to everything that you mentioned just now. So that's my abstracted story version of your very nicely summarized recap of our conversation.
Can't do it better than that.
I don't know if you saw my recent essay about contempt prior to investigation, where as human beings, we shut ourselves off to new things. We say, I don't like house music. I don't like short stories. I don't like this. I'm not going to try that. And so finally I just said, yes, I like to say yes to things. And I tried it, and it's incredible. It's for real. People are like, oh, I don't like short stories. Well, maybe you don't like short stories because you only have read ones that suck. And they all suck right now. So you think they all suck, and this does not suck. You typically have a choice, and it's binary. You can either be critically successful or you can be commercially successful, but you usually can't be both. When you get to be like 50, you start to think about your impact, right? Your impact on other people, your impact on the world, and what is your contribution? Like, what are you leaving behind after you die? And what I am leaving behind is stuff like this.
My dad was a big fan of Fulham Football Club, and he grew up in Fulham near the ground. And he went, he kind of snuck into his first game as a young kid, and he took me there.
Cottage all the way back.
Yeah, exactly. And this was the amazing thing. He and I went to a game. We still go to games together, and he's 85 now, and we were sitting at a game a couple of years ago against Brighton, and we're sitting there at halftime chatting, and we were just kind of chatting about how long we've been going to the stadium. And the seats are still the same wooden seats that have been there for years. And we realized that that he'd been going to that same stadium that year for 75 years, and I'd been going for 50, which is incredible, if you think about it. And to have that connection, football was always my first passion. I played every sport that I could growing up and was half proficient at most of them. But football was always my first love, and my dad and I would go to those games every other week. We'd go to every home game. He taught me to drive, going to those games. It was just that was our time together, and we loved it then, and we love it now. And it's I know I've got more games with him behind me than I have in front of him, but I'm determined to spend as many more of those afternoons and evenings with him as I can, knowing that the result doesn't really matter. I mean, the beauty of supporting a team like Fulham is the wins are so special. You don't expect to win. And so that's actually a good thing. The disappointment is gone in a heartbeat, because you get upset about a loss and you think, well, hang on a second, what were we expecting here? That really has been the beauty of Fulham. It's not the great victories, because there haven't been that many, and it's not the defeats, but it's just the moments.
You got to admit, that's pretty cool, right? I mean, we had Justin Castelli breaking down goals versus visions. We had Jason Buck breaking down entrepreneurs as risk mitigators, not the way you normally think about that stuff. You had Jenny Rozelle telling the Susan Hunter mentorship and gratitude story. The length that woman stuck her neck out is just incredible. Perth Tolle, competition happening on merits and looking for that around the globe. You have to hear the story about the rest of her history and where this comes from out of her childhood and her parents. God of the Gaps, Tyrone Ross, parents and gap fillers in our life. Lots of cool stuff. Pablos Holman, creative versus craft. How often do you hear a guy who worked with Bezos on the rockets, who also befriended skateboarding legend Rodney Mullen? Where else are you getting stories like that? Come on, people. Kris Abdelmessih, why you have to not care what other people think? So much New Jersey in that lesson and in that episode. Rusty Guinn, my partner at Panoptica and Epsilon Theory. Earnestness versus the cynicism cycle. The Scythian ring. Rusty just makes everything more science fiction poetic, and I love him for it. Jared Dillian, contempt prior to investigation. Take it from an ex-Lehman Brothers trader. You got to have that, especially when you turn a fiction author who loves the Barry Hannas of the world. And of course, we closed on the great Grant Williams, one of my inspirations for this series, candidly, and the types of conversations that he has. 75 years at the stadium, Fulham. You got to stay up this year. You got to do it. You got to pull it together. Keep it going. These are the kinds of stories we get on Intentional Investor. You get the lens of me doing the interview and extracting this out. And if you're interested in strategic thinkers and how they retain humanity, I got like a year and a half of these. Get into it. The collaboration feature is real. It's turned on. You can go to Cultish Creative. You can go to Epsilon Theory YouTube. You're going to see all this stuff all in one place, or check out my playlists. I'm going to write a post about this one too. Thanks for tuning in, guys. We're out.